We all want that.
Yeah.
That feeling of belonging, like real unconditional love that families are supposed to have, right?
Mm-hmm.
But things aren't always that simple, are they? Family can be messy,
Huh.
complicated,
Yeah.
especially when narcissism comes into the picture.
Yeah.
So that's what we're diving into today.
Right.
One of our producers actually flagged this topic, thought it would make for a powerful episode. And, well, here we are. We're going to take a deep look at what it's like to grow up in a family touched by narcissism.
Right.
Now, this stuff can be heavy, we know that. But sometimes just understanding these patterns, just recognizing them,
Yeah.
they can be eye-opening, even freeing for some people.
It can be really powerful for sure.
And to help us unpack all of this, we have an incredible expert joining us today.
Well, thank you.
Someone who truly understands this world. So welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you. You're a psychoanalyst. You specialize in complex PTSD, trauma-informed therapy, and you have years of experience dealing with the impact of narcissistic abuse and developmental trauma.
I do. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here. I think family systems are always interesting, but when you add in narcissistic tendencies, it can definitely create its own unique set of challenges.
Definitely. So before we get into all of that, let's just, I don't know, define our terms here. I think for someone who maybe hasn't really encountered this, how would you even describe a narcissistic person? And I'm thinking less about like the clinical diagnosis and more about just like, what are those everyday red flags that someone might pick up on?
Yeah, that's a great point. You don't want to go around diagnosing people, but recognizing patterns can be really helpful.
Right.
So when we talk about narcissism, you're often going to see this really inflated sense of self-importance. So a really big ego, this constant need for admiration, like they need to be fed by other people.
Right.
And then really crucially, a real lack of empathy. Like they just can't really understand or acknowledge how other people feel. They've got their blinders on.
So it's not just like being a little self-centered. It's more like their needs are the center of the universe.
Yeah.
And everyone else is just kind of revolving around them.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. That's exactly it. And because of that, because of this need to be the center of attention, you often see a lot of controlling behavior, manipulation,
Right.
gaslighting, making you doubt your own sanity, volatile mood swings. You're always walking on eggshells around them.
So instead of offering support or comfort, it's more like you're overreacting or that's not how it happened, even when you know in your heart what you experienced.
That's right. Yeah, they invalidate your feelings to protect themselves, to protect their own reality.
Wow.
And to really grasp how damaging that can be, just imagine yourself as a child, right? Trying to share your emotions with a parent, and they completely shut you down. They miss it.
Right.
They're incapable of really meeting you where you are emotionally.
Right.
And I can remember so clearly, sharing anxieties I had about school, about an event with my own parent, and instead of getting any comfort, any validation, it was just total dismissal. And then it turned into all about their experiences.
Oh, wow.
It was just so clear right then that my feelings were irrelevant.
Oh, wow. That must have been so isolating, as a child especially, to feel that way, to feel so unheard, unseen. And I would imagine those early experiences, particularly with a parent, like you said, they really shape how you view yourself in the world.
They really do. It has a profound impact on your self-worth, your ability to form healthy relationships.
Because if you aren't getting that validation, if you're not getting that mirroring from your caregiver, especially early on, that's rough.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads us to this next part, because if that's how they are as like people, how does that actually show up in their parenting?
Yeah, so I think one of the most damaging things you see with narcissistic parents is they tend to see their children as extensions of themselves, not as their own separate people with their own thoughts and feelings and dreams. So they have a hard time grasping that concept.
So it's less about how can I support my child in becoming their own person, and more like, how can they be molded to fit my needs, my expectations, my vision board, basically?
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And this can lead to the parent projecting, right? All of their own unfulfilled desires, ambitions. So let's say you have a parent who's obsessed with status and success. They might push their child relentlessly toward a certain career path, not because it's what the child wants, but because it fulfills the parent's need for that external validation.
Right, so the child's individuality is kind of getting suffocated under the weight of all of that.
Exactly.
And this is where the gaslighting comes back in.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Gaslighting becomes this tool, this way to control the situation, to control the child. The parent might downplay the child's experiences.
Oh, and
You're being too sensitive, or you're making a big deal out of nothing. And that causes the child to start questioning what they're feeling, their memories.
So it's all about controlling the narrative, basically, maintaining that version of reality. But what happens when the child actually pushes back, tries to express themselves authentically? I mean, that's got to create some friction.
It does. It really does. And that's where we often start to see these really distinct roles emerge within the family, almost like a dysfunctional play where everyone gets assigned a part.
Okay, family dynamics as a dysfunctional play.
Yeah.
That image is going to stick with me. So let's talk about these roles. We hear terms like, the golden child or the scapegoat thrown around. Can you break those down for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So the scapegoat, that's the child who, no matter what they do, it's never good enough.
Right.
They're always wrong in the eyes of that narcissistic parent.
Right.
And they become the target, the blame for anything and everything that goes wrong.
Oh, wow.
It's a way for the parent to deflect, to never take responsibility, and to maintain their own sense of being perfect.
Right.
And this obviously can really damage the scapegoat's self-esteem.
Yeah.
They often internalize the sense of worthlessness.
It's really heartbreaking when you think about it. And then on the flip side, you have the golden child.
Yeah.
The one who can seemingly do no wrong, who embodies
Wow.
everything the parent values. But I imagine that comes with its own set of pressures, right?
Right, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
The golden child often feels this immense pressure to maintain that image, that ideal.
Of course.
They have to live up to these impossible standards that are set by the parent. And that can lead to anxiety, perfectionism, this fear of ever showing their flaws, ever making a mistake.
Right. And what about the people, the kids in the family who can see what's happening, who try to point it out, to kind of, I don't know, shed light on the dysfunction? Do they have a role in this whole play?
They do. And you know what? They often face the most wrath from that narcissistic parent.
Oh,
We might call them the truth tellers,
okay.
the ones who question the inconsistencies, who challenge the parent's version of reality. But any dissent is a threat.
Right.
And so they often face isolation, punishment. They might even become the target of smear campaigns within the family.
So it's almost like the family system itself becomes complicit in maintaining that power dynamic.
That's exactly right, yeah. And this is where the flying monkeys come in, right?
Right. The flying monkeys.
The other family members, sometimes friends, who maybe even unwittingly support the narcissistic parent.
Oh, interesting.
They defend the parent, they justify their actions.
Right.
They might even join in on the scapegoating.
Wow. So it's not always out of malice or anything. Sometimes it's out of loyalty.
Yeah.
Or even just fear, right? Fear of becoming a target themselves.
You got it. It becomes this whole network, this web that upholds this distorted reality.
Wow. And then you have, well, what about the kids who just disappear,
Right.
who fade into the background? Do they have a name? A role in this?
Yeah, the invisible child.
Oh, okay.
The one who copes by basically fading away.
Yeah.
They suppress their needs, their emotions to avoid any conflict. They become masters at being invisible.
That's so sad. I think about, like, the quiet kid in school who seems totally fine being on their own, but maybe underneath it all, they're just, I don't know, struggling to form bonds. Is that a similar thing?
It definitely can be. Yeah, the invisible child often becomes really independent,
Right.
self-reliant on the surface, but then they struggle with things like intimacy, vulnerability in their relationships later on.
Yeah.
Because they learned early on that the best way to survive, especially in their family, was to not be seen too much.
Right. To shrink themselves down.
Yeah.
It's like each of these roles, each of these kids is just trying to cope in their own way with this fundamental lack of safety, of emotional safety within their own family.
That's right. That's really sad. And what's so fascinating about all of this, and I think for a lot of people, probably a little scary, is how these patterns repeat themselves. Like they get passed down through generations. That's that generational cycle of narcissism, right?
Exactly. And again, it's not about blaming parents here. It's about understanding that these behaviors, these patterns, often get passed down unconsciously. It's like inheriting emotional baggage.
Right.
You don't even realize you're carrying it sometimes. So, for example, a mother who was constantly criticized as a child might find herself putting those same unrealistic expectations on her own children, and the cycle continues.
So it's less about intention and more about these like deeply ingrained behaviors that just keep playing out in new relationships.
That's right, yeah. So, is there any way to break free from that? I mean, are we all just destined to repeat the same mistakes as our parents? I mean, that's a bit bleak, isn't it?
It can seem that way,
Yeah.
but thankfully, no, you're not doomed.
Okay, good.
There's hope. There's always hope.
So, It can seem pretty bleak. Like, are we all just, I don't know, stuck repeating these cycles? But I'm really hoping that's not the case. So how do we even begin to break free from that legacy, those patterns?
Right. That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The million-dollar question. And thankfully, the answer isn't about, erasing the past. It's more about changing how we relate to it.
Okay.
Awareness. Awareness is huge, probably the most important, powerful step. When you start to recognize those dynamics that aren't healthy, those patterns in your own thinking and behavior even, that's when things can start to shift.
It's like you're holding up a mirror to those family dynamics and saying,
Right.
okay, I see you now. I understand how you've impacted me, but you don't control me.
That's such a good way to put it, yeah. It's recognizing that those patterns, even though they can feel so ingrained, they're learned, they're not destiny. And it takes real courage to start challenging those long-held beliefs,
Yeah.
questioning those narratives you've been told, maybe even about yourself.
It can't be easy
Yeah.
to challenge your beliefs like that, especially when it's your family we're talking about. So where do you even start if you want to untangle all of that?
Well, therapy, for one, therapy can be really, really powerful for this kind of work.
Okay.
Having that support, that compassionate, trained professional to help you process those experiences, unpack all of that, and learn better ways of coping. It can make a world of difference. It's like having a guide, someone there with you as you're navigating all of this journey of self-discovery, of healing.
So it's almost like you're learning a new language,
Yeah.
a new way of being, of interacting with yourself, with other people that's based on respect and realness, honesty, and healthy boundaries, right?
Yes. Boundaries, huge. Learning how to say no without the guilt trip.
Right.
Putting your needs first, even if it ruffles some feathers in the family.
Right.
Yeah, and it can be really uncomfortable at first,
Like
even
how
feel
much?
like you're betraying your family in a way.
Right.
But it's not. It's about self-love, self-preservation.
And I imagine those conversations, those moments where you're actually setting those boundaries, that must bring up so much stuff like guilt, fear of, being rejected, or even like retaliation, especially if that family member, if they're still stuck in those
Oh,
patterns.
absolutely. And that's why it's so important to remember that healing isn't linear.
Yeah.
There will be setbacks, moments of doubt where you question if it's even worth it.
Yeah.
But the key is to be kind to yourself through it all, to notice the small victories. And
Us.
remember, you are not alone in this. Not at all.
We've covered so much ground today. It's a lot to process, right? Like the complexities of these families, but also this very real potential for healing, for breaking those cycles.
Yeah.
So as we start to wrap up here, is there like one big takeaway, one thing you really want our listeners to hold on to as they process all of this?
If there's just one thing, it's that healing is possible. You deserve to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
You deserve relationships that are built on respect, empathy, genuine connection. And it's never too late to start changing your story.
That's powerful. And to everyone listening, as you're reflecting on everything we've talked about today, think about just one small step, one thing you can do this week to start creating a life that feels more fulfilling, more authentically you. Maybe it is reaching out to a therapist, setting that boundary with a family member, or even just acknowledging your own needs, your own feelings. For once, it all matters. It's all progress. And again, you are not alone on this journey. Thanks for joining us for what has been a really insightful deep dive.
Yeah.
So it can feel pretty bleak when you start to see these generational patterns. Like, are we all just doomed to repeat the same cycles? But I'm hoping that's not the case. So where do we even begin to break free from that legacy?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
The answer, thankfully, isn't about magically erasing the past, but about, rewriting our relationship with it.
Okay.
Awareness is the first and most important, I think, step. The moment you start to recognize those unhealthy dynamics, those ingrained patterns of thinking and behaving, that's when you start to reclaim your power.
So it's like holding up a mirror to those family dynamics and saying, okay, I see you. I understand how you've shaped me, but you don't control me anymore.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that those patterns, as deeply ingrained as they might be, are learned behaviors, not an inevitable fate. It takes courage to challenge those long-held beliefs, to question those ingrained narratives we've been told about ourselves and our families. But it's possible.
It can be easy, though, to challenge those foundational beliefs, especially when it comes to family. Where does someone even begin to untangle all of that?
Therapy can be an incredibly powerful tool for this kind of work. Having a compassionate, trained professional to help you process those experiences, to unpack those deeply ingrained beliefs and develop healthier coping mechanisms can be life-changing. It's like having a guide as you navigate this new terrain of self-discovery and healing.
It's almost like you're learning a whole new language, a new way of relating to yourself and others that's based on respect, authenticity, and healthy boundaries.
That's beautifully said. Setting boundaries, that's huge. It's about learning to say no without guilt, to prioritize your own needs and well-being, even if it means disrupting those old family dynamics.
Right.
It can be uncomfortable at first, even feel like you're betraying your family, but ultimately it's an act of self-love and liberation.
And I imagine those conversations, those moments of setting boundaries, can bring up a lot of guilt, maybe even fear of rejection or retaliation, especially if you're dealing with a family member who's still stuck in those narcissistic patterns.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to remember that healing is not a linear process. There will be setbacks, moments of self-doubt, maybe even times when you question whether it's all worth it. But the key is to be kind to yourself, to celebrate those small victories, and to remember that you're not alone on this journey.
You've given us so much to think about today, both about the complexities of narcissistic families and the very real possibility of healing and breaking free from those patterns. As we wrap up, is there one takeaway you'd want our listeners to carry with them as they process all of this?
If there's one thing I want to emphasize, it's that healing is possible, and you deserve to be happy. You deserve to have relationships that are based on mutual respect, empathy, and love. It's never too late to start rewriting your story.
Such powerful words to end on. And to our listeners, as you reflect on everything we've discussed today, I encourage you to think about one small step you can take this week to cultivate a more fulfilling and authentic life. Maybe it's reaching out to a therapist, setting a healthy boundary with a family member, or simply acknowledging your own needs and feelings. It's all progress, and you're not alone on this journey. Thanks for joining us on this incredibly insightful deep dive.